Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, is it time to make room for a Cat 6 hurricane? We talked to two lifelong meteorologists about how evolving weather patterns are forcing forecasters to find new ways to communicate risk. Then, Frisbee golf gives a boost to living in recovery. We talked to the sober dudes behind the upstart DISC Jax League. And the Jacksonville Jaguars hold their own against the Bengals until they don't. We get a professional post-game critique. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or tag us on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. President Trump is suggesting that the U.S. has reached a deal with China over TikTok. In a post on social media, Trump said a meeting led to an agreement involving a company that, in his words, young people in the U.S. very much wanted to save. Trump says he plans to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday. Tech company NVIDIA is facing antitrust investigations in China. Reporter Cherise Pham has more.
China's market regulator announced that a preliminary investigation has found NVIDIA violated the country's anti-competition law. The regulator is investigating NVIDIA's acquisition of Israeli company Mellanox Technologies. The State Administration for Market Regulation announced its findings just as negotiators from China and the U.S. are meeting in Madrid to try and hammer out a trade deal. And it comes on the heels of a deal NVIDIA struck with the Trump administration last month, where NVIDIA agreed to pay 15% of its revenues to the U.S. government. China's regulator didn't say whether it would punish NVIDIA, saying only that it would conduct further investigations. For NPR News, I'm Cherise Pham in Hong Kong.
More than 30 people across the nation have been fired, put on leave, investigated, or face calls to resign because of social media posts criticizing Charlie Kirk. That's according to an analysis by NPR. Tony Gonzalez from member station WPLN reports tensions remain high after the assassination of the conservative activist.
An assistant dean at Middle Tennessee State University posted, quote, "Hate begets hate. Zero sympathy" about Kirk's death and was fired. The university president said the post undermined the university's credibility. At Cumberland University outside Nashville, a professor and staff member were fired over what administrators called their inappropriate posts. The school also canceled a talk by journalist Matthew Dowd, who was fired by MSNBC over his commentary. And in Nashville, 2 emergency workers are on leave over social posts about Kirk. In some cases, prominent Republicans have drawn attention to the posts and applied pressure. For NPR News, I'm Tony Gonzalez in Nashville.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio is wrapping up his 2-day trip to Israel. Speaking alongside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem today, Rubio outlined what he says it would take to end the war in Gaza.
It ends by eliminating the people who did it, by ending them as a threat. It ends by releasing every single hostage, both living and deceased. There should never have been a hostage. There should not be a hostage now. And then, when all of that is done, then we can begin the work, I hope, internationally.
Rubio says they also discussed last week's Israeli airstrikes against Hamas leaders in Doha. Meanwhile, Arab leaders are meeting today to talk about a response to the airstrikes. This is NPR News in Washington.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News, 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's now 9:04. Concerts are scheduled through September 28th as part of St. Augustine's Sing Out Loud Music Festival. And while the marquee events might be the big acts like Hozier and Father John Misty, local acts are getting in on the fun as well. Eris Hasselman is the guitarist of Pocket Knife Dance Party, a St. Augustine rock outfit that he plays in with some of his best friends. Hasselman says a great part of Sing Out Loud is the showcase concerts at local venues are all free and mostly within the city's downtown core.
They're all usually within like a 2-mile radius. Is also really nice to be like, I want to see this opener at Spinster Abbott's, and then I want to see this headliner at Star Bez. Good thing all we have to do is go over the lines, and it's right there.
You'll have to wait until this Thursday to catch Pocket Knife Dance Party at Spinster Abbott's on San Marco. For a full list of shows, visit the Sing Out Loud website at singoutloudfestival.com. The future of Peg Leg Pete in downtown Fernandina Beach will be discussed in the weeks ahead after the 5-decade-old statue was declared unsafe for public display. An engineering review done on the statue recommends it either be fenced in so no one can climb on it or moved out of downtown. The statue was carved from a single 10-foot piece of live oak and placed on downtown Fernandina's waterfront in 1978, then moved next to the visitor center. The future of the statue will likely be discussed at the next historic district council meeting on Thursday, October 16th. Mild temperatures and mostly dry today in Northeast Florida.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Lodestar Foundation, inspired by the principle that helping someone else less fortunate is a path to a happier, healthier, and more meaningful life. Learn more at lodestarfoundation.org.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a new study says it's time to expand the storm severity scale to include Cat 6 hurricanes. We talked to two experts about why a new rating system is needed and what it would look like. Later in the program, we meet the organizer behind a social, competitive, and sober nonprofit built on the sport of Frisbee golf. But first, the number one killer during storms isn't even part of our current hurricane rating system. Here to help us understand why some are pushing to change that, we're joined by two lifelong meteorologists and friends of the station. Lou Turner, Chief Meteorologist at First Coast News. Good morning, Lou.
Good morning, Ann. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for being here. We're also joined by his predecessor of 43 years, now retired, and full-time first dude, Tim Deegan. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Ann. And, of course, we should say full disclosure, we're friends of you, too.
Absolutely. Not just the station.
It's always good to see you.
Well, it's good to have my two pals here on a Monday. Thanks for fighting traffic and parking lot construction and the whole deal.
We made it.
You made it.
I appreciate it, but I really don't deserve credit. I'm retired. Lou has to work. I go back to the hammock.
So just before we got started, we're going to be talking about proposals for a new hurricane rating system. But you guys are always talking about whether we're on mic or off mic, and you were reminding me that today is an important, not holiday, it's an important anniversary.
Yeah, sort of gives me chills. We were in different places at the time, that is Lou and I, but 1999. Floyd was passing us at about 1 p.m., that is the eye, by about 120 miles. Now, to put things in perspective, especially for the youngsters, back then, the 48-hour, so if we're going to say, hey, prepare for 2 days from now, the 48-hour error was about 200 miles. That is the forecast. And so, although every computer model by that time was pretty much saying the eye wouldn't pass any closer than about 50 to 100 miles, there was just too much of an if because of the error. And so, therefore, both the Hurricane Center and then other forecasters, and we certainly agreed, was that most of Florida, at least the East Coast, should evacuate. Wow. And then Georgia, and then the Carolinas. So I think the quote at the time was it was the country's largest peacetime evacuation up to that point. Now I was forecasting. Lou had a different experience.
Yeah, well, I was a junior in high school, and I remember living in Beaufort, South Carolina, and the evacuation, as it was here in Florida, it included Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, so massive. And when you're talking about the curve, the width of the forecast error at the time in the 90s, it was the right thing to do. I mean, with all of those people trying to get on roads, trying to get out, it was an absolute melee, and interstates, highways full. We couldn't evacuate. We sat in traffic for 5 hours and said, let's just go home. And that's what ultimately ended up being what many people had to do in Florida.
It became a really big question because obviously, as Ann mentioned, you don't want to worst place to be in a car as far as stuck. Plus, besides, a lot of folks were by the time they were realizing they were stuck, they were beginning to realize from south going north, oh, this thing is going, at least the worst of it. We had bad weather, but the worst of it was going to pass to the east. And the big question we started hearing from the public was, can we just turn around? And so they did. Now that it was that hurricane that really then, at least in Tallahassee, forced the whole issue of let's legislate the fact that when there's the next big one, and we need to, we will create a safe way to then have interstates going all in one direction.
Yeah, because that was just packed solid. I mean, they just weren't moving. I-10 was
they
completely a parking lot.
were not moving. I remember that that the governor, Jeb, at the time, his son was going to Bowles.
Here in Jacksonville.
And when he found out that it took 15 hours to get from here to Tallahassee, he said to his emergency managers, this was not a successful evacuation. Of course, there was a much more serious side. There were elderly who depended on electricity. Folks couldn't stop and go to the restroom. But, I do think this ties right in with the discussion you're going to have. Because remember, even now, the main reason we evacuate is for the storm surge flooding, not from rainfall flooding, which is why over the decades we've seen if you look at who's most likely to die, to put it bluntly, from flooding, it's from the rainfall inland flooding, not from the storm surge, not because the storm surges have become less, they've become worse, but it's that since the 80s we've been pretty successful about evacuating people away from the storm surge, but we've never really done that with rainfall.
Well, what's so bananas about this, and I don't know if everybody knows it, I think it's one of those things that I kind of knew, but when you really think upon it, is just so strange that, so many of the hurricane-related deaths, as you say, like 80% have to do with storm surge and rainfall, and yet that's not part of the current hurricane classification system. Tell us, first of all, about the Saffir-Simpson wind scale, how that works, what those rankings are. Those are the ones we usually see along with evacuation orders.
Can I take historical?
By all means.
Because I was there when there were debates happening, and then you can take us to what's it for now, okay?
By all means.
So I'm glad you used the term bananas. That's a nice term to use on a Monday morning, and here's why. The storm surge, Saffir-Simpson, the reason that they used that to evacuate originally was for storm surge.
Yeah.
And the Hurricane Center would constantly say, and we all agreed, that the biggest killer was storm surge, and that's what the evacuation should be on. Some scientists, and I understand why this happened, see if I can make sense out of this. The storm surge varies depending on what the ocean bottom is like, the time of the day, the tides. So a Category 3 hurricane might produce what would be equivalent of a storm surge of a Category 1 under some situations and worse than the 3 under others. So it does get confusing, okay? So what they decided to do was, okay, and this was in the late 90s, instead of this telling folks this number that it defines a storm surge in the winds, it just defines the winds.
They took out the storm surge.
So pure scientifically, I understand that. But as communicators, we thought, gang, we've just spent the last 2 decades pretty successfully saying, yeah, the wind's a big deal, but you want to leave from the storm surge, and now we're going to make the headline the winds. So there's some of us that are real hope we go back to when storm surge is the headline. It makes it more complicated.
It does.
But so anyhow, I just wanted to put some historical perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's important because the headline of this, particularly is this new study that came out from the University of South Florida saying we need to create a system that goes up to 6, but it's not just like it's not like spinal tap, Lou, where, it goes to 11. Right.
Sure.
This is not just adding 6, but it's sort of the same metrics. It would actually include rainfall, it would include storm surge, and they would find a new way to sort of calculate 1 through 6.
Right. You're gonna there is going to be an art that is going to have to be injected into this. And when I say that, I mean you've got objective measurements, as Tim's talking to. So when you're talking Saffir-Simpson scale 1 to 5, we know by sensors, we know by buoy data, we know by drop sondes coming from hurricane hunters exactly what the winds are. That's objective. So you can do it 1 to 5. Now, what Tim mentions being a little more complicated is surge has so much more skillful forecasting that's going to be involved. Orientation of the storm, direction of it. It could be a Category 4 hurricane, but if it's coming from a different in wind scale, coming from a different side of the state, you're not going to have as much of a concern. Irma, it comes to mind. As Irma is passing Jacksonville on September 11, it's a tropical storm strength. But I think if we go through what this study is showing, I mean, that probably would have been technically because of surge, because of flooding in the rainfall. That I think within this new study scale, this would have been a Category 3 storm, if not a 4, just by terms of the flooding that would have been involved with Irma. So those adjustments will be interesting you're going to have to add a subjective. Now, there is modeling that gets done with surge. There is things that us scientists we can put in there, but it's going to be a little more subjective, in my opinion.
Yeah, and more of an art, as you say.
Correct.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Lou Turner and Tim Deegan about whether it's time to expand the hurricane rating scale. A little later, we're going to make them update us on the latest developments in the Atlantic and the remaining season ahead. But if you have questions or comments, you can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at WJCT.org or reach out on social media. So one of the things that this study looked at is how much of a determinant the 1 through 5 category is in prompting someone to evacuate. And part of the research that they did was modeling fake storms, sort of. They got 4,000 people to participate. They sent them information about the storm. One of them ranked the storm based on sort of the existing system, the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. The other one on this new proposed system that they've created called the Tropical Cyclone Severity Scale. And again, that's one that includes these other water metrics, essentially. And they found, interestingly, that it really impacted how informed they were about the risks that were posed specifically and whether they chose to evacuate. And it was really a whole different set of results.
I think it's a great example of you can't just have a good forecast. You have to be able to communicate it. I mean, I certainly learned that many times in my 43 years. Now, certainly there were forecasts I just plain blew, but there were other times where in my head I felt like I had a great forecast. But in hearing from my coworkers, from people on the street, from my wife, that what they were expecting is not what I thought I was saying.
Correct.
Right? So that's a big deal. But let me give 3 examples, and agree with Lou that there's going to be an art here. But I think I think because we're talking about protecting lives, just because it's hard work, we shouldn't do it. Here's 3 examples, and this is using it roughly. But if we were using this new scale, okay. One example was from Helene last year. By the time the Helene was forecast, by the time it made it up into the Appalachians, other places got hit just as tragically as Asheville. But I think people think of Asheville as being ground zero, right? For wow, it's hundreds of miles away, and yet hundreds of people died because of Helene, right? So Helene and the forecast, if you're just going with wind, was right on. That Helene was forecast to be down to a tropical storm by the time it got to Asheville. But at the same time, and I'm not just saying our forecast, I mean the official forecast, we're saying this is going to be a rainfall event that most people living in Asheville have never seen. I mean, it gives me chills just to say it. So, but that's what the wording was. And I understand that a lot of people just hear, oh, it's just going to be a tropical storm. If they were using this new that I understand, people probably would have been hearing a Cat 3 or more due to rainfall. Or we could go back to Sandy, the perfect storm in 2012, and people in Jersey who got the worst storm surge they've ever seen, they kind of became relaxed when they heard, oh, Sandy's no longer a hurricane.
Right.
It was no longer tropical anymore, but it hadn't become any weaker. Or we could go to this year, Barry goes ashore as a tropical storm in Mexico, okay? barely recognized as a system heading up to South Texas. And yet we had that tragedy west of San Antonio. So under this scenario, maybe this is an extreme example, but under this scenario, people in South Texas, Kerrville, San Antonio, where that tragic flood occurred, where people should have been evacuated, at the very least, they would have heard, oh, it's just a tropical storm going into Mexico. But by the time it comes up to here, it's going to be a Cat 3 rainfall event. We could go on
I
and
want
on.
to say, one thing while we're talking, I want to show for the people who are watching on our live stream a graphic that sort of demonstrates the difference between these two systems.
Right.
And there sort of shows the traditional cone and then basically what the new ranking system would show someone. And it really, in living color kind of demonstrates the range of hazards. And I think it kind of, demonstrates what somebody making those decisions would be able to see, Lou.
Yeah, it more information is always going to be better. It's going to come down to the social science element of this, which I've kind of learned from Tim, is the communication of it. You're gonna it's going to be a learning curve if this were to take effect. But I will say, like the Hurricane Center, and they're going to be pitching this to the NHC.
These researchers are going to pitch it.
Correct. Yeah, they will be pitching it to them. The Hurricane Center is not an old fuddy-duddy group that's firm on their beliefs, and in that they will adapt, and they have, and they make changes each and every year.
Mm-hmm.
Now where you see old school cones that you would get watches and warnings just for the coastline. They're putting inland. It's to an experimental level, but they are putting inland watches and warnings in now. So that's an evolution, and they do this every single year. There's some sort of change. Now it's up to us as the broadcasters, the folks who are communicating, to make sure that that's out there. Now, with that being said, it's certainly something I could see the Hurricane Center evolving with. And to kind of piggyback off what Tim said at the very, very beginning, which is back in the 90s, the error being 200 miles. The evolution and the refinement, today, I'm fine with something like this because the forecasting error has dropped in that time frame down to 50 miles.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yes.
It's pretty amazing. And same thing with rainfall. Let's say 30 years ago, we would, as this hurricane storm would head inland, our next biggest concern was always, especially hills or mountains, if there was going to be heavy rains, because then there would be flash flooding. But the forecasting, it'd have to be such a broad brush that it would have been really hard 30 or 40 years ago to say, hey, you folks in Asheville, you should evacuate. Yeah. You folks in Kerrville, you should evacuate. The forecast accuracy has reached the point now to where, at least on the really big events, to where just like we feel pretty solid about evacuating people for storm surge, that we're getting at least more confident about saying, yes, we know this is coming in from the Gulf of Mexico and you're hundreds of miles away, but you folks that live, and it's going to take some work from emergency planners in places like San Antonio or up around the hills of Atlanta or Charlotte or in the Appalachians, but to where under extreme conditions, yeah, you folks who have lived along this river and you've never seen it flood, this time you better get out.
Yeah. I want to take a call from Mark on the south side. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. I'm going to try and phrase this the best I can, but for decades and decades, we were told that normal blood pressure was 140/90. And then not too long ago, they changed it. Nope, it's 120/80. That's what normal blood pressure ought to be. I'm at 130. My docs say, don't worry about it. You're fine. I understand advances come along and there are new ways to look at data. And, you mentioned the 200-mile window down to about a 50-mile window. And I think all that's great. My question, though, is that if you're going to change the categories of hurricanes, then either retroactively or in the future, I worry that people are going to start, for lack of a better word, peddling fear that the sky is falling, that we're seeing increased hurricanes and this kind of thing that might impact policy decisions. And so although I do get and I understand and I'm not completely against recategorizing or including different metrics and things, if you aren't going to compare apples to apples in the past with what you potentially could see in the future, I do see a subjective measure in some of that. You might call me an idiot. I apologize if I am.
Not at
but
all.
That was just a thought that I had.
No, I agree. I would not call you an idiot at all. And that's why all of this really is peer-reviewed stuff, which is what the point Lou was making was that the group from South Florida, this is a doctoral, and it's going to go out to the public, and not only will the National Hurricane Center look at it, but it's going to be peer-reviewed. And if it doesn't stand up, it's going to collapse. And the Hurricane Center has always done peer-reviewed activity to broaden the point, because we're trying to figure out in the future, as we continue to add CO2 to the atmosphere, any discussion about what that extra energy will mean as far as more intense hurricanes, all of that is peer-reviewed. So, and there's always discussion about how do you compare this past, present, future.
And it's hard because it is changing.
Well, it is changing. Both the amount of CO2, unfortunately, continues to increase, but then the accuracy and what we know about weather also continues to improve. So my guess is, and some of it is to I believe it's Mark on the south side, could be with what Mark is kind of concerned about. I would guess that if they do this, they're more likely to stay within the current Category 5, not expand it yet to 6, current Category 5, and then somehow just say out of that current standard, these are the more particular detailed things we can now say that this category, whatever hurricane might produce for your area.
I do kind of want to run through what this proposed calculation would look like, just so people have a sense of it. So basically, right now we have this 1 to 5. This would expand, this would kind of keep a 1 to 5, but it would give a 1 to 5 ranking for each of these three hazards. It would basically include wind, but also rainfall and also storm surge. And then each of those, if there's two of those categories that are the same, it would bump the category ranking up to the next level. So basically, if you had, a wind of 1, but a storm surge and a rainfall of 3, it would bump it to a 4. And then a category 6 would open up in the event that there were two categories that were a 5, or if there are 2 4s and the third is a 5. And so basically, it would allow for those rankings. And so I just kind of wanted to put that out there so people understand that it's not hard math, but it basically divvies up the risk into these three different categories.
And that's a lot of math. So it comes down to the communicator.
Yep.
It comes down to where you're getting your information from. And I think Mark brought up a great point about the fear mongering. There are so many voices now, and you've got the Hurricane Center providing a centralized voice, but there are hundreds of online meteorologists now that make money on clicks that aggregate.
Are they really meteorologists, or are they just sort of kind of?
Some are, some are, and some are very, very smart. I mean,
I'm going to speak to the. It's the one time I'm going to hop on top because people may say, well, Lou's just trying to get us to watch broadcasters. Lou is not. I can tell you that as a meteorologist, but this is the first time I didn't have a schedule, and was able to watch everything as just a guy at home. But I can go online digital, and oh my gosh, the amount of folks that are out there that are putting out information that you can tell they just want you to come back to them. So at the very least, I'm going to say with Lou here that folks, if you're new to the area, if you don't follow the science, make sure you follow somebody you trust, as opposed to this new model or new person, because you're right. They're and I'm not going to get personal with certain individuals, but not only do people know Lou and others in the local broadcast area, but someone like Lou and that weather team, they're going to be here for the next 5 to 10 years. And if we've learned, the first thing you learn in evacuation is that if you cry wolf, what that means is really not just what happened then, but that means those people aren't going to evacuate the next time. So the worst thing for any forecaster who cares about the future generations is you don't want to cry wolf.
Yeah.
And these guys aren't going to cry wolf. Some folks online, they don't seem to be concerned about that.
We got a call from Alan at the beaches. Good morning, Alan. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, Ann, Tim, and Lou. Thanks for coming on to talk about this. So one of the key takeaways from last year's Helene was that the National Hurricane Center has become very, very good at track forecasting. Helene did almost exactly what they said it was going to do. And I guess that's the result of a lot more data aggregation, a lot more data collection, a lot more powerful computing resources to make sense of the data, reconcile the historical record, and put it into a track forecast. But we have had, as recently as 10 years ago, I'm thinking of Joaquin, whose anniversary is coming up here at the end of the month, storms that don't do what they're expected to do. Is that sort of unpredictability now in the rearview mirror, or are we still susceptible to storms that don't behave well?
I don't think it's in the rearview mirror. I think, there's going to be error, and with it tightening and getting better, there's more confidence. But there's always going to be that element where it misbehaves, so to speak.
What about intensification? I mean, that seems like the one area that is
boom. That's it, right?
Rapid
and this gentleman nailed it too, because he said track. So when we talk about accuracy, we're talking track. But even the world's best intensity forecasters, and they're, in my opinion, the National Hurricane Center, we have not improved much. And so that is always...
Is it that you haven't improved, or that it's gotten more difficult? Because I feel like when you have, you guys talk about like an ocean that's warmer, and that can accelerate the development of a storm and make it more unpredictable. So is it that the forecasting isn't rising to the occasion, or is it that it's just the challenges getting more difficult?
I understand what you're saying. I would say the challenge is increasing because of the increased frequency. The meteorology is all pretty basic. The warmer the oceans are going to be, the higher the dew points are going to be, then the only real question becomes how much shear is there going to be.
How much what's there going to be?
Shear.
Okay.
That's upper levels. And there's still debate about what us adding CO2 to the atmosphere does to that. But adding CO2 to the atmosphere has definitely warming up the oceans, definitely has increased the intensity of the hurricanes. Gentlemen talked about data. I think a lot of us would agree we need more data. There's a lot of people excited about AI. I'm excited about AI. But if we don't increase the amount of data from the ocean, from the atmosphere, AI, it doesn't really help. So hopefully some folks out there hear me, that I think there's been some debate about we're not going to spend as much in our government on getting data. I hope we have second and third thoughts about that when it comes to weather. We need more data.
We actually have a question, an email from Ricardo saying, how will NOAA, NWS, NASA, and FEMA cuts and redirection affect the change in scale? How will these impact the communication of risk? I mean, obviously, there have been massive cuts to some of these agencies. And
I just gave my answer, so Lou.
Yep, concur. Okay. Need more data. It boils down to the most elementary thing. Crap information into the model, you get crap information out.
Right.
So, I mean, that's kind of the most simple way to put it, crude as it may be. But you got to have the data plugged in. The model's doing exactly what it's told. It may be the best supercomputer in the world, but you got to have the best possible information, and we need more of it from our sea surfaces.
So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing right now, because I know that there has been a discussion, in the world of meteorology about kind of, where your colleague, Robert Speta, did kind of a neat graphic looking at from 2016 to 2025, sort of where we were on this day. September, whatever it was, 5th or something. And, this idea that the oceans were quieter now than sometimes they have been. So give us a look at kind of what that means.
So it's interesting. So if you go from, August 20th to September 15th, kind of you get in that date range, what we kind of saw there. Now, we do have an area we're watching in the Atlantic right now from the Hurricane Center, but with no named systems between that date, you got to go back to the early night. I mean, we haven't
92, I think.
92, exactly. You got to go back to 1992 since we have seen a tropical Atlantic in the basin this quiet. There are oscillations all over planet Earth, and they kind of just they move just all around the globe. You have areas of rising air, you have areas of sinking air, and at this point, we've had an Atlantic when Tim mentioned shear. the tropical system's very finicky. All right, they've got to once they get developed, but you have to have something to develop to get the fuel from that warm water. If if nothing develops with sinking air, vertical shear, winds kind of tearing the thing apart, a cluster of thunderstorms, you don't get anything to develop. What is looking like in the long range, as an oscillation sort of shifts back over the Atlantic, potential for more rising air. You think afternoon thunderstorms here in Jacksonville, even you get rising air. That's what creates our afternoon sea breeze thunderstorms. Same thing for the Atlantic. You got to have an unstable environment. So that could be shifting as we get towards the end of this month, beginning of October, and could increase. And that's why we got to think about those October systems that we have had in the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, you've just gotten to a topic to where if you had 2 hours, we could, because now you open up to globally. But basically, I'm going to say the same thing Lou said, but think about it this way. We typically watch what we call tropical waves. Those are systems coming off the coast of Africa. There's typically about 100 to 120. Even during an active year, we only, and this is amazing saying now versus 40 years ago, get 20 named storms. So that means only 1 out of 5 in an active year actually develops. So to Lou's point, there's a lot of things that have to develop three-dimensionally. And I'll just add one more thing for the fellow weather geeks out there. Here's where I think the next big learning area comes from. Everybody right now is discussing, and it makes sense globally. Well, what's happening in the Indian Ocean affects what happens over the North Sahara. It happens, and I totally agree with that. But if you notice, almost all of that discussion is the Northern Hemisphere. And folks, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, which is where this all forms, that happens because the trade winds of the Northern Hemisphere are meeting the trade winds from the Southern Hemisphere. So at some point, we have to start talking about, well, maybe what's happening in the Amazon is impacting da-da-da-da-da-da. And
Sure.
I think that's where the next new area of forecasting level will take us, how the Southern Hemisphere impacts the Northern Hemisphere.
In terms of rating, we've talked about the, proposed change to the scale of a hurricane ranking. But one thing that you guys have talked about previously is possibly changing the definition of what hurricane season is. And I want to ask you, because we're talking about kind of a relatively quiet period in the Atlantic, although you are watching something. But, October is, historically has been a problem month for this area. Do you see the need to push out what we think of as hurricane season into the months on either side or just later in the year?
I see your point. I understand why some people are talking about this. I personally just look at the numbers.
Yep.
And I'll just go back to 1981 when I started. So in 1981, in June, you only expected a named storm every other year as an average. In May, we're now at that point. And so I think if that made sense to have June be the beginning, then why wouldn't we have that as May now being the threshold?
Wow.
And I don't think we can do that with December yet.
Right. Yeah. So it's going to boil down to, for me, the stats, the numbers. If that curve, which you see kind of that classic bell peaking, around September 10. If that kind of continues to expand more to the left of the curve, which would be towards May, then yeah, I tend to agree with Tim. We get the May, the ones that sneak up. We've had late October, November, but and then we sea surface temperatures. You got to have 80 and above. So once that you get to December, and that generally is below. You kind of cut the faucet off.
Plus the jet stream by that point is digging down into the
deep.
Caribbean, and
and that's what would lead to shear as well. Some of those hostile conditions for any sort of development.
So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you guys for, first of all, like the 5-day forecast. What are we looking at? But then also just what you're watching for in the next couple weeks with the storm season.
So for me, all right, obviously we have what's in the Hurricane Center's watching now, area development, high chance, if you were to pull up any maps, whether it's my station or anyway, you're seeing that. Doesn't look like it'll be something that directly, at least modeling, would impact the East Coast. But my attention, of course, continues on the African waves. But there's an untapped resource that we've gone all season without much activity, and that's the kind of that Western Caribbean. So I'm going to watch Western Caribbean, Central America, and the Gulf as we get late in the season. That's where modeling may not do as good of a job of the quick, rapid intensification type of system. So we'll be watching that very carefully as it kind of get towards October and November.
Surf forecast, Tim Deegan.
I'm glad you said that because I'll go from stressful to fun. I totally agree with Lou that basically we call it the Central American Gyre, and we really will have to watch because those things can spin up fast. But really, October and November, it's going to be very interesting this year. But this next one coming across, I think we're going to call it Gabrielle, should pass about 1,200 miles east of us, which does mean we could have a classic groundswell next week to surf.
There he goes.
I'll give you
There
some.
he goes.
I'll give you reports.
Thank you very much. I've been texting him for water reports.
Well,
so.
I'm glad that you're out on the water. I'm glad that you're doing the shift that you are now, Lou. It's great to have you. Chief Meteorologist Lou Turner, former First Coast News Chief Meteorologist Tim Deegan. Thank you so much for coming on this morning.
Thank you, Ann.
All right. Up next, a boost to sober living from an upstart Frisbee golf league. Welcome back. Whether it's sober meetups, recovery apps, or dry bars, the world of sober living is expanding along with the number of people looking for healthy alternatives. Here to tell us about one non-traditional entree into the First Coast is Michael Fisher. He's co-founder and vice president of DISC Jax. Good morning, Michael.
Hey, good morning. Thank you.
It's very nice to have you. So first of all, let's just start with DISC Jax. It stands for Dudes Impacting Sober Communities.
That's right.
And so it is a light take on a subject that can be sort of heavy sometimes. Tell us a little bit about the origin story of DISC Jax.
Well, thank you. I've been a lifetime member of Riverside Presbyterian Church, and they have always supported a local sober living house called Riverside Tradition House. And in my walk, my recovery walk, I began to take some interest in this cause and wound up going there quite often and visiting with the guys. And I noticed that they had quite a bit of downtime. And for me, I found that was detrimental to my recovery, is spending too much time being complacent. So I met some friends that were involved in the sport of disc golf, and they invited me out to play with them, and it soon became a passion. And having that passion, I noticed these guys, they had just that ability too, and I wanted them to spend time, find a pastime that was active, because I believe an active lifestyle does complement people's sobriety, and it just seemed like a natural fit. So in that, my friend Joe Biederman and I, we said, well, what else can we do to help these guys at the Sober Living House? And more importantly, how can we help sober living houses all together? And that was where we came up with DISC Jax Inc. and the tournament that we use now to raise funds and support these sober living houses.
And so are participants coming to the game out of a disc golf background? Are they coming out of, a recovery background? Is it a mix of both? Are people who are not in recovery part of the league? Tell us a little bit about the parameters.
Okay, so yeah, it's actually open. Our event is open to everyone. And so our event is November 20th, and there will be a formal disc golf tournament that the local disc golfing community is participating in. It is a pay-to-play event, and it is sanctioned. But afterwards, there is our recovery event, which is geared more to introducing the sport to people within the sober community. uh, really, it just started with us wanting to give away some discs to people in need who had some mild interest in the sport. And that quickly ballooned into an effort to support not just the sober living community, but the houses as well. And the support that we receive from the business community, in particularly, is what really evolved our organization and the efforts that we do to complement not only the residents at the sober living, but the actual business community of Jacksonville and how they can benefit from that too.
And so, I mean, how can they benefit? I know that, part of what your goal is to help raise funds, whether it's to provide some, startup materials for people who are interested in disc golf or to help sustain the work of recovery houses.
That's right. So again, we thought if we raise like $2,000 to pay for some discs and give them away, that's going to be great. Big win, and we will have done that, and a feather in our cap, and we'll go on with our lives. When we saw the response that the business community gave us, which resulted in a $25,000 that we were able to raise, which we did split all the proceeds between two sober living houses. When we saw that, we really said, this is something that we can perpetuate, and we should be doing this. And why not? Because the business community, they benefit so much from these guys living at these sober living houses. Much of their workforce comes from them. Matter of fact, I'd say that their best employees come from these places because they're always the first to arrive to work. They're the last to leave. Quite often, they are given a leadership position very quickly within these companies. So our business community definitely benefits from having a sober workforce.
And so I'm curious, just, this is one element of Jacksonville's, scene, as you will, when it comes to people who are living a sober lifestyle or exploring it or in recovery of some kind. What other scaffolding would you like to see to sort of support and build out that community?
Well, I think that there are resources um, that are being just out of reach for them, for some of them. But I think that there has been efforts to improve that within the Jacksonville city of Jacksonville is doing their best to do that. I think that erasing the stigmatism of addiction and alcoholism, I think as a within the general community of understanding what it is that these people are suffering from and how they can best help. I think that is a big hurdle that we are making inroads on now. But as far as Jacksonville has an incredible sober recovery community and element. I've been to other cities where that is not the case. And it is much more difficult to find a meeting, to find a clubhouse. They're not meeting as frequently. The resources are not there. There's almost a combative kind of element to that the community might have towards people who are in active addiction. As well as treatment centers, how easy is it to get into one? Jacksonville has a number of great treatment centers. They even have a new startup that is offering scholarships there. So I think that what's being done now is we are making a lot of inroads in giving people that kind of assistance, particularly in Jacksonville.
Well, this event is called Dare to Disc. As you said, it's the 22nd of November, and it's at Clutho Park.
It is at Clutho Park. I believe it's actually the 20th. It's Saturday.
Okay.
So Clutho Park, we'll have our formal tournament, and afterwards we'll have our fun throw where it's open to the public. They're welcome to come out. We're going to put on a clinic. We're going to show you how to play disc golf. We're going to tell you about the rules and hopefully give you an opportunity to test your skills and see if this is a sport worth doing, because disc golf is great for people in early recovery. Like me, they didn't have a whole lot of resources going on for them. Ball golf was not something that could be done.
Yeah.
So this sport is typically free, and there are courses all over the nation.
Well, Michael Fisher, it is a pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Up next, we recap the Jaguars' close loss to the Cincinnati Bengals.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, finding the who, what, when, where, why, and how that led to the accident is critical to proving the truth.
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com. One Jax presents Breaking Bread and Barriers, Humanity in the Age of Information, a community dinner and dialogue about social media, algorithms, and the public square. Tuesday, September 16th at 6 p.m. at WJCT Studios. Details and registration at onejax.org.
Hey, it's Peter Sagal. You may already know that Congress has ended federal funding to public media, but no matter what's happening in Washington now or in the future, this station's best bet is you. Making a donation, that's great. Making a monthly contribution, even better. Knowing we can rely on you helps in uncertain times. Take control of this station's future. Become a sustaining member today. Here's how.
Visit WJCT.org/radio and thank you.
Charlie Kirk was killed doing exactly what propelled him to the heights of conservative politics, rallying young people, gamely arguing his positions against any challenge. His assassination again raises the question, can anything turn back the rising tide of political violence in this country? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Charlie Kirk's killing adds to a long list of recent political violence in America. A Minnesota state legislator murdered in her home. The Pennsylvania governor's house set on fire. An assassination attempt on then-candidate Trump. In the next installment of our weekly series, If You Can Keep It, the growing threat and what it means for our democracy. That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, it was an afternoon of self-inflicted wounds for the Jaguars as the team fell to the Bengals in the final seconds yesterday. Here to recap the hard loss is Alessandra Pombrian. She is a sportscaster at WJXT News for Jax, our news partners. Alessandra, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not excited to talk about the loss, but I'm excited to be here.
It's not a victory Monday. The Jags looked good at the beginning of this game. What happened?
I know. In the beginning of the game, I mean, they scored on the first drive, which is not like them from years past. They converted third downs. They stopped the Browns or Joe Burrow couldn't do anything at the beginning of the game, and then it completely shifted. Kind of in the second quarter, I would say it kind of shifted. They were flagged multiple times for illegal shifts, which. Yes, that was a tough road environment. Those fans seemed like they were very passionate. Joe Burrow goes down, and then Jake Browning comes in, and you couldn't stop him. Jamar Chase had almost 150 yards, which he's one of the best in the league. Obviously, he was the best last year, but you had to do something to try to limit them, try to limit Jake Browning. And I have to say, the Jaguars defense had 3 sacks and 3 interceptions. I mean, if you hear that in any other game, you're like, oh. They definitely won, and unfortunately that didn't work out.
I saw that one news outlet said that the Jaguars left a lot of food on the table in Ohio, and I guess the idea being that this is something that they really should have won.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like I said, 3 sacks, 3 interceptions, and you couldn't win that game is like pretty remarkable because, like I said, you look at any other stat line, that's usually a winning team, and the offense at the beginning. They looked good in the beginning of the game, and then it kind of just fell apart, kind of like the old Jaguars, unfortunately. But yeah, Cincinnati won 31-27. I think the turning point was definitely the fourth quarter. They were in the red zone. Trevor Lawrence had 3 chances to score a touchdown. The first pass was incomplete to Brian Thomas Jr., then it was incomplete to De'Ami Brown, and then Brian Thomas Jr. dropped the one that was basically right on the goal line, and that
Right in his
forced
paws, you know, it really just
yeah.
seemed like he had it.
Yeah, and that forced Cam Little to kick a 25-yard field goal. They had the 27-24 lead, and, the Browns were down there, and the defense could have, held them. Then, of course, Travis Hunter got flagged for DPI, which extended the Cincinnati drive. And once you get that, because it's a spot foul, so wherever it happens, that's where they move up to. They could have kicked a field goal and tied the game, but, good for Cincinnati and the Bengals to be aggressive and ultimately, score the touchdown with the final few seconds. And then Trey Hendrickson, of course, the star of that defense over there in Cincinnati, sacked Lawrence on the final, basically play of the game, the end of the game.
I mean, Jags fans are going to be looking at a couple of calls that the refs made that were pretty consequential and a little bit controversial as well.
Oh, yeah. No, some of the pass interference calls people were a little skeptical about, especially the one on Travis Hunter. But at the end of the day, it's like you can't fix it. That's the penalty that was thrown, and that's what happened in the game. Of course, the Jaguars can go back to the league and send in the play, and then the league can address it and see, okay, maybe should have that. But, shoulda, coulda, woulda after the game, in my opinion, it's not anything for fans really to be like nagging on or be dwelling about, because, the Jaguars lost. Now you got to turn to the Texans, who are coming this Sunday for your first AFC South divisional opponent. So this is a big game. The Jaguars need to win this. You need to win your divisional games. They really matter more than just any other game, because if you win your division, you get to go to the playoffs. So they need to flush this loss. It's unfortunate what happened. And Joe Burrow should be out for apparently 3 months.
Yeah, what do we know? He injured his toe, and now they're thinking he might need surgery?
Yeah, so Adam Schefter broke the news this morning that he suffered turf toe, and he'll have to get surgery. So it's probably a 3-month process. So they should have Jake Browning now. And, of course, Jake Browning beat the Jaguars. So, it looks good for Cincinnati despite, unfortunately, the injury to Joe Burrow.
So next week, the Houstons, that's here at home?
Yeah.
Yeah,
1
and
p.m.
so we'll be watching that. What do you hear just from the locker room after this loss? I'm guessing the mood wasn't delighted. Was it reflective? Was it just kind of grouchy? What's going on in there?
I think it was a little reflective. It didn't seem like, obviously I wasn't there, but from the videos that were posted and the interviews that were posted, they didn't seem too upset. I mean, of course they were upset, but they didn't seem defeated, I should say. Obviously they're going to have to watch the film and, see what adjustments they can make. But, I think it's only week 2. We got a long rest of the season to go. So, Andrew Wingert said after, he was like, hopefully at, in December, January, we can look back, or the Jaguars can look back at this loss beginning in the season and kind of laugh about it, be like, what were we doing?
Yeah, lessons learned.
Yes. So hopefully that's how it turns out. But, they really need to flush this loss and focus on the Texans.
All right. Well, Alessandra Pombrian, sorry it wasn't a better news to bring you in this morning, but we love talking to you every Monday. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, thanks, guys.
All right. And that's our program. Thank you for listening. If you have comments or questions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast tonight at 8 o'clock, or you can find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. The executive producer of First Coast Connect is David Luckin. Our producer is Stacy Bennett, and our associate producer is Isabella Casapow. Brady Corum's out right now, so we're running our controls through Michelle Corum and Andrew Weichman. And our theme music is performed by Club de Belugas. Join us tomorrow when we talk to a local campus leader about how his group is working to bring civility to conversations after the assassination of a political firebrand. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or BaptistJax.com. Mayo Clinic, working to fix the unfixable by combining robotics and an endoscope to perform spinal fusion surgeries more safely and effectively.